I'm really lost on the timeline of all these events.
Mhm.
And from everything that I've seen, I don't see a timeline. Has there been a timeline that has been presented by the prosecution?
No, you're not missing anything. In their opening statement, I don't know if you watched opening statements, but the opening statement by Adam Lally, who is the ADA for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, who is prosecuting this case, was, I don't remember how long, but in his opening statement, he named 76 people. He threw out 76 names, something like 74, 76 names. It was so confusing and so bland. There was no passion. There was no conviction. You know, sometimes you watch trials and you see the prosecutor get up there, and after they're done, you're like, wow, you know, this guy really believes in justice. He really believes in his case.
Yeah.
It was so all over the place. And that's the way I feel like this trial has been. You know, there's no sort of flow to it. There's no chronological order. And I feel like the first thing that he should have done was really, we still don't know how John O'Keefe died. We have not seen a cause of death or a manner of death in this trial. And we still have not heard a cause of death. We still don't know how he died. I feel like the prosecution has been running defense the entire time. And their entire case has been put on to say, okay, these people didn't do it. Therefore, she must have done it, which that's not a great way to convince a jury. Because so far, I haven't seen any evidence that John O'Keefe was hit by a car. Some of the interesting text messages from Proctor, some of the ones that I found most interesting, because my background is civil litigation. I'm a litigator. So not only have I handled cases of fraud, conspiracy, and cover-up, the biggest one that I handled was against the Catholic Church for all of the victims, survivors of clergy abuse. So I know firsthand that cover-ups can happen, conspiracies can happen. It's not often. They don't often happen, but they can. And I also come from a litigation background of representing victims of all kinds of things in addition to a DV, accidents, plane crashes, train crashes, scaffolding accidents, but also car accidents and dog bite accidents, right? Dog bites. So what's struck me, excuse the pun, but what struck me the most about this case is that the injuries that we know about that happened to John O'Keefe, in my mind, are not the injuries that you would see from a low speed car versus pedestrian automobile accident. They're just not. The only injuries that we know about so far, and that's why the medical examiner's testimony is so important here, are a gash to the back of the head that I think is 2 to 3 inches wide that caused multiple skull fractures. In addition to, all of the witnesses who have seen his body said he had at least one swollen eye, maybe two. Something that looked like an egg, that was described as an egg on his forehead over his right eye, some lacerations to his nose and above his eyebrows, and these what look like an animal attack injuries to his right forearm and upper arm. I don't know if you've seen those photos.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
But when you see a victim of a pedestrian knockdown motor vehicle accident, you will always see some sort of bumper marks, right? Injuries to the torso, the legs, the knees, the ankles, some sort of impact with that car. We don't have that here. And we haven't seen that. I've been covering all of the pretrial motions, all of the pleadings, all of the police reports, everything that was public. And we haven't heard about any injuries to his torso, legs, hips, knees. How can that happen if you're hit by a car?
The taillight being damaged.
Right.
I mean, I've been in car accidents before. I have been rear-ended and my taillight hasn't been that damaged. What I don't understand either is where this whole theory comes in. And I know there's other people that have done, videos. Turtle Boy did this one where, it was like 62 feet and he was going 24, she was going 24 miles an hour going backwards. I don't know if that's what the prosecution has alleged or not, but
that's what their opening statement said. You're exactly right. Nobody saw it happen and nobody saw his body, but at least 4 witnesses in the house say they left after she allegedly hit him and left him in the lawn to die. And many of them were looking out the window the whole time, watching her car pull up, waiting for them to come in, seeing the passenger door open, then they all say he didn't come in the house. And some of their group text messages among the people in the house said, tell them the guy never came in the house.
Really?
Yeah.
And has this been brought up in court? This
Yeah.
particular?
That group text was brought out. I think it was during Matt McCabe's testimony. So Jen McCabe is married to Matt McCabe. They had
Okay.
group text messages between Jen and Matt and Brian and Nicole Albert, who are the homeowners. And Jen and Nicole are sisters. Got that? There's a lot of family ties here. A lot of family
Yes.
ties.
Yes.
And so they had a group message. And in the group message, they were talking about, I think they were referring to Chris Albert, owns a pizzeria. So he's a brother of Brian.
Yes.
And Chris, they said, the news crew is at D&E Pizza, like eating lunch or something.
Uh-huh.
So somebody said, tell Chris to ask them some questions. And then they said, tell them the guy never went in the house. And then somebody said, exactly. Then they were also talking about Carrie Roberts, who went with Jen and Karen to try and find John the next morning. And they said things like, oh, well, I just don't want them to think that Carrie's making up stuff this late. They haven't interviewed her yet. And Brian Albert, who's a Boston police officer, said, well, if they didn't interview her right the first time, that's on them. And then Jen McCabe is presented with some messages where Carrie Roberts was at Jen's house being interviewed in the other room. And Jen wrote in the group, she's telling them everything, all in caps. And then after that wrote, I love it. When you put all these pieces together, it just makes it look suspicious, right?
Yeah.
And when you put that together with the 227 Google search that Jen McCabe's phone made.
The long to die in the cold, right?
Right. A lot of people just can't get past that. Now, she says she didn't make that search until 6:23, 6:24 in the morning because Karen said to her, Google hypothermia. How long does it take to die in the cold? But we're going to hear from experts, from Celebrate, which is the gold standard of cellular forensics, who are going to come and say that search was made at 2:27. It doesn't revert back to a search tab that you opened when you make another search in the morning. Think of the floodgates of jails that are going to open and be like, okay, Celebrate convicted me. Now you have to let me out because it's not accurate.
And that's the thing. I talked to Mark Betterow about this, right?
Yeah.
And you know Mark, for these Celebrate records to be inaccurate in this case, it means exactly what you just said. Then all these other convictions and all these other things get thrown out because of this.
Right. The text messages between Michael Proctor and I think it was a group message between him and maybe 3 of his cohorts, his other troopers.
Like Yuri Buchanan.
I don't know if Yuri was on this thread, and I don't want to misquote, but they were talking about the medical examiner. And there were some text messages in April of 2022. So the date of death, let's say January 29th, 2022, Karen is arrested on February 1st and arraigned on February 2nd, 2022. And that was original, I think, vehicular manslaughter charges. They upgrade her charges to murder in June of that same year. But in April and May is when they convene the state grand jury to hear this case to upgrade her charges to murder. And in April, there's this thread of messages between Proctor, DeChico, who has not testified yet, and I think 2 other troopers, in which Michael Proctor says something like, Yuri and I have had at least 3 conference calls with her. She won't change the cause of death. What's undetermined about it? It's so obvious. We've even sent her pictures. And then one of the other troopers says, oh, you should have just let me do it. I would have got her to change it. So
yes. And that came out yesterday in court.
Yes. And knowing what I know, that the death certificate says that the manner of death is undetermined. For those who don't know, there's 5 different manners of death that you can have on your death certificate. It's homicide, accidental, natural, or undetermined. This medical examiner has undetermined on the death certificate. And what we know about this autopsy report, it's never been made public, but they've quoted portions of it in the pretrial motions. The medical examiner says the cause of death is blunt force trauma to the head causing a brain bleed, multiple skull fractures, and hypothermia because he was outside in the cold for long enough that it would contribute to his death. And yet the manner of death is undetermined. But in the autopsy report, she says, these injuries do not appear to be consistent with a fight. Why would she say that? Why would a medical examiner ever say what didn't cause the injuries or what didn't cause the death? Because there's a list of many things that didn't cause the death. It's also not consistent with dying in a fire. It's also not consistent with a
Yeah.
drowning. So when you put together that with these text messages from Proctor, it gives the appearance of perhaps leaning on the medical examiner to say something in the autopsy report or to change or amend the autopsy report in order to assist them with upgrading these charges to murder.